Welcome to our Bootstrap fundamental tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to be walking you through how to create a website using Twitter Bootstrap from the ground up. We're going to be going through all the great features and components that Bootstrap has to offer. So we're going to present you with the code, we're going to present you what the code does, and we're going to be walking you through how to build out a full website using Bootstrap. Designing websites on desktops, and then when mobile devices came along, it presented an interesting challenge for developers, so that we had to customize our code to be able to fit and accommodate different device screens and screen sizes. Unfortunately, in the beginning it was a lot harder. You had to really work with styling, you had to do a lot of testing, check out how it responded, and then resize screens, and there's quite a bit of work. And then Bootstrap came along and it solved a lot of that. And it's got a lot of really smart components that are available within it that really make creating responsive sites a breeze. So you could literally start with a ground up and style your web pages as needed using all of these great Bootstrap components. So we're going to be walking through all of this stuff, all of the Bootstrap components, and everything you need to know about Bootstrap in order to get started within this course. Also going to be concluding all of the source files that we're using within the lessons, so you can also follow along and work with Bootstrap and customize your own custom templates using the knowledge that we're talking about within this course. No wonder why Bootstrap is one of the most popular repos available on GitHub because of its ease of use and customizability that it allows. We're ready? Let's get started using Twitter Bootstrap as your CSS framework. In this lesson, we're going to cover off how to add Bootstrap and how to access Bootstrap within your web code. So there's going to be essentially two different ways that you can do that. You can either use the Bootstrap CDN. So this is a web source where you just copy paste these links in, and this allows you to have Bootstrap right on your web page. So this is one way of doing that. Within this example, we've just got some really simple code here where we've got what's called a Jumbotron. And what that does in Bootstrap, that just creates this kind of bigger area that's got this background color, slightly tinted background color, and that's what's called a Jumbotron, and then text content between this div class is going to be within the Jumbotron. So this is a Jumbotron, and this is one of the ways you know that you've got access to the Twitter Bootstrap CSS, because this is one of the classes that's available within it. So within this code, what we've done here is we've just connected to the Twitter Bootstrap CSS, and we're using the minified version. So the .min signifies minified. So if you want to actually access the full version that's not minified, you can do that as well. So that's going to have all the code out within this type of grouping, so it's readable by developer when you're coming in. And then of course the minified version you won't be able to read because, well, you'll be able to read, but it's going to be compressed, so it gets rid of all the white spacing, and it does cut down on the loading time. Here we also have a theme that we've added. So what we've done here is we went over and got basically the CDNs to get started. So this is not actually required. You don't need to have this within your code. So just getting over our code here, this is not a requirement for Bootstrap, and either is the Bootstrap JavaScript. So this allows you to have components, pre-built JavaScript libraries that you can have access to within Bootstrap. But for a basic theme, you're not going to need these. If you do need to have some additional styling, then you can go ahead and add in the theme, as well as you'll probably have your own style sheets because you're going to be customizing the Bootstrap itself. And over here, we've just loaded in jQuery. because Bootstrap does use jQuery, so you need to load jQuery before you load the Bootstrap JS if you are going to be using some of the Bootstrap components, pre-built components. So that's the first way that you can bring Bootstrap into your web page. The second way is to go over to the website and just download the Bootstrap. Download Bootstrap, and when you download this, you're going to get access to all of this. This is what gets downloaded. So you get the regular Bootstrap CSS, you get the minified version as well as the themes, and you get the Bootstrap JS, minified JS, and within fonts you get these glyphicons, and those allow you to have some additional styling within Bootstrap. So that's the other way to get Bootstrap, or you could download the full source code or the SaaS version. This tutorial, what we've done is we've just downloaded Bootstrap and we've applied it, installed it on our system, so we do have access to it locally. So what we can do is we can just remove out all of this excess coding here and access Bootstrap through our local machine. And when we go onto the local host, you see that we're still able to get this Jumbotron working because we do have the files loaded on our local machine. If you're using something like CodePen, you can go into the settings, you can go into CSS, and you can select out Quick Add and just simply select Bootstrap, and that'll give you the Bootstrap theme right away within the coding, and you don't have to add it within the headers. You just have to add whatever you'd be putting between the body tags, as well as if you have any additional CSS, you could put that here within the CSS area. So you wouldn't actually be able to customize the actual Bootstrap CSS, but in general you probably don't want to be doing that anyway in the first place. So that's how you set up and begin to start using Bootstrap within your web content. When it comes to Bootstrap, understanding Bootstrap's grid system is a crucial part of understanding how Bootstrap handles responsive design. So here we've got a sample of Bootstrap and its grid system. So on the outside you've got your container, and then you've got rows, and each row contains a set of columns, and to get a full width on the columns it should equal 12 because it's 12 columns across the entire page. Columns can be either 1, they could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So all depending on what width you want, what percentage you want to go across that particular page. If you wanted to do a combination that equals up to 4 or equals up to 12, you could do 4 and 8. So any numbers that equal up to 12. So we see here we've got 8 and 4, we've got 4, 4, 4, we've got 6 and 6. Here we've got 4, 1, and 8 ones. And when we look at it within the browser, we see that we do have all the different columns here. So here we had 4, we had the 8 ones, we had 8, we had 4, 4, 4, 4, and 6 and 6. And you can see that it neatly fits within the container area of the Bootstrap layout. What does this all mean when it comes to responsive? So there's going to be 4 different classes that you can use for sizing. And just to give you an illustration of how this is going to work, we see that when we do shrink down the page size, so this is to simulate full-size desktop, and then we shrink it down and we get roughly to a tablet size, and we see that the grid still hasn't changed because we're using SM. So this indicates for the smallest within this format is going to be SM. So if we go to an XS, which would be for a phone or an even smaller screen, we see that we lose all of our grid and it actually becomes all individual. They're all now individual rows, and you can see when we go back out, we see that our grid comes back. And this is what responsive design does, is it allows you to shrink to different screen sizes and still use the same coding. So when you're planning out your responsive design layout, you should always take that into consideration, that you're actually going to be working across at least 3 different sizes, where you've got your XS, you've got your SM, and then you've got your MD for desktops, and then even on the larger side you've got your larger desktops, so the LG. So for the most part, MD and LG are used interchangeably, but if you do want to ensure that you do have on the Mac side, you could be using LG. To get a better idea of this, you can go to bootstrap.com CSS, and here they do have what the grid options are. So as we mentioned, that for extra small devices, so these are going to be your mobile phones, the ones with the really small screens that are less than 768 pixels wide, that's going to be your column XS. If you're going to be larger than 768 but less than 992, you're going to use column SM. And as you can see, there's a little bit of lap over, and this is because the columns itself have a gutter, what's called a gutter. So there's a gutter width in between there, so they're not exactly going to overlap. But container width here, so this is 750, this container width is going to be 970, and this container width is going to be 1170. So that gives you an idea of the container size, and then the columns contained within that container are going to match within this grid pattern. Down below, they have some examples here of stacked to horizontal. So they have all the different columns here, and they're MD columns. So they're going to shrink on anything less than this. So anything less than the medium device screen size, it's going to shrink down to rows. As you can see, the columns actually rearrange depending on your screen size. So your big screen size can look actually different than your smaller screen sizes. And here they've got some examples of some mixed mobile and desktop. And the way that this is going to work is when you're including the XS. So this is going to simplify the stack in smaller devices. As you can see, when we do shrink it down less than the MD, so when we're shrinking it down to the smaller sizes, we see that it is stacking. So instead of actually going through and having only one row because it's less than the MD size, we see that it does still have those 2 columns there. So going into the rows, and you can shrink it down all the way, and you should be able to still see, as within this example, you can still see that we do have the XS6, we have the XS6 there, and we're only using the 4 when we're actually within the size that we can use that for. Expand our view to a size that accommodates the SM, the 4. We see that in fact it does actually go out to there, so there's the column SM4, and when we go out a little bit further, we see that we do get the column SM4 or the MD4 as well. So this is so basically when you include the XS, that's going to limit it to what it's going to shrink down. So normally if I was to shrink this down, these would, when it gets under that MD size, which is up here, when it gets under that 992, that's 768, it shrinks down and it restacks into additional rows. So it's not doing that because of the excess, and that's why it's not, it's locking that down into being separated columns. So if your design does call for it, then make sure that you are including those excess as well. So here we have a mixture of XS, SM, and here we have MD. So just like in the previous example, you can see that when you do adjust to whatever size is that width. So here we've got for mobile, tablet, and desktop. So we've got a mobile layout, we've got a tablet layout, and then we have a desktop layout. If you do combine classes in this way, you're actually going to be creating really dynamic, flexible layouts that are going to be able to accommodate all that responsiveness. And back to when you're using multiple classes, so you got to always remember that it's going to scale up. So if you want to have it limited to always be 12 columns or a width of 12 here, you could just leave in that excess 12, and that will scale it up, and you don't have to include the rest of these. You don't have to do SM12, MD12, unless you want to have different number of columns within here. So, and that's the only time that you actually have to include all these additional classes for the sizing. So once you start thinking in 12s and creating your Bootstrap layouts to be designed, so depending on the size, if you do need more text within a really small area, then that's something to keep in mind. Or if you don't want your picture to stack over and go the full width, or if you do want to have like maybe a comparison, pros and cons chart, so you don't want to have that stacked below, and those are the things that you got to keep in mind when you are making your layout. So if it is something that needs to be side by side, to make sure that you are working that in within the coding. So making sure that if it is something that has to work in within there, make sure that you're using excess. Change that to excess, and I do make that change. You see that it does lock in that that 4, and then here it's counting it as 1, and then these additional ones get a separate row. So it will fill out the rest of the 12. So even though this 4 and 1 isn't going to equal up to 12, this excess is only going to be 4, so it's only going to take 4 spots there, and that's going to leave the space here, and automatically the next one is going to stack in there. So this is the second one that's stacking in. Maybe we'll just change it to 1 and 2, so you could better get an idea of what's happening within the stacking here. So because 1 has an excess of 4, it's only going to use up these 4 columns. So this one here is going to be still reserved for the additional excess of 8, and this one's going to take the spacing for that. And then these additional ones, they get a separate row each because they're SM, they're SM1. So once it shrinks down to that excess size, you see that they do get additional rows on their own. So it doesn't always need to add up to 12, but if it doesn't add up to 12, then depending on what size you're using down here, and if it fits within that excess 4, it'll stack that in next to it. But if this doesn't fit within that excess 4, so if we had an excess 9, that's not going to equal 12, and we see that this automatically gets bumped to the next row, but the next one that fits into that spacing gets stacked within there. So there is a little bit of time to kind of get used to the way that this works. And we've also have a fluid container, so if we change, and then again, as we mentioned before, the difference between fluid and just container is that fluid does 100%, whereas container sets it to a max of 1170. So depending on what size your desktop screen is, that's what it's going to be able to resize to. So, and it doesn't really make a difference once you get under 1170, because you're going to be taking up the full size anyway. You see that it's still taking up the full size, so you can't really see a difference between container and container fluid if you're under 1170. But if you're above 1170, then you start seeing that you do get that button gutter and that border there coming in.